This is Duke University.
A small committee consisting of Sally Bates, Susan Pendleton Jones, Richard Hayes, Mary Owens Fitzgerald, Owen Fitzgerald, Wes Brown, and myself began holding meetings with Thomas Sayre of the Clearscapes group in Raleigh. We knew we wanted a cross, and we knew it was supposed to be up there somewhere, either back or forward or low or high. We didn't know. We knew we wanted the cross. Thomas asked the prior question wisely, even though he knew the answer. What does the cross mean to Christians? As I recall, we had two theological issues that dominated. One was the placement, whether to make it high or low. We knew we wanted it suspended as a focus for our worship. We knew that we wanted to claim this space as Christian holy space in the university. Not that we wanted the truth of the cross to fight against the truth of the university, but to join it and to witness to it. We knew that it had to be in some relationship with the altar as the definitive commentary on everything that goes on the altar. But we also knew, as the Gospel of John tells us, that it should be high and lifted up for the whole world to see. We, I think, wanted a cross about which we could sing, "In the cross of Christ I glory, towering o'er the wrecks of time." And the second thing we talked about was its composition. It would not be another piece of ecclesial furniture. It would not be a tasteful accessory to what was already here. We didn't know at the time it would be earth-cast concrete weighing 600 pounds. The first time I saw it, suspended and installed, coincidentally was the day I walked into this room to participate in a memorial service for one of our students. And I'm happy to report, Thomas, the cross passed the test. So before I introduce and we welcome Thomas Sayre, I want to greet two dear friends of the Divinity School, Mary Owens Fitzgerald, Owen Fitzgerald. And I want to say, of course, from the bottom of my heart, thank you on behalf of this entire community. Mary Owens and Owen Fitzgerald not only made this possible financially, but they were integrally involved in every aspect of the deliberations, including our visit to the studio in Raleigh. They have long been dear, trusted friends of this school, and we thank you very much for all that you have done to make this possible, and I hope that you will derive immense satisfaction from knowing that your gift has helped to enrich and focus the worship of generations of students in this place. Now to introduce Thomas Sayre. He is the founding principal of Clearscapes, a design and architectural firm in Raleigh. He grew up in the shadow of the Episcopal National Theater Cathedral. You know, that's a Freudian slip. He grew up in the shadow of the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., where his father was the dean. And he therefore came to this task with a deep understanding of the aspirations of the Christian community. He has been a prolific artist and sculptor. He has done the Shimmering Wall at the Raleigh Convention Center, the World Wall at the Marbles Kids Museum. He has several permanent installations, really impressive outdoor sculptures at the North Carolina Museum of Art, which you probably have seen. He has other installations at the Washington Nationals Stadium in D.C., an immense and thought-provoking piece in the Nashville, Tennessee Public Square, the San Jose Police Station, the South Carolina Aquarium in Charleston, and too many others to name here and around the world. Our committee was immediately inspired by his vision and completely won over by his feel for the earth, from which the cross may not be separated. We welcome you. Thank you for being with us.
I'm just going to roam around. Can you hear okay, magically? I thought it would be, the useful thing to do would be to tell you the story of how this got here. We've just heard a lot from Rick. I'm going to tell it from my point of view. In many ways, this cross started here when I was 6 or 7. This is Washington Cathedral. We lived 200 yards from where I was standing when I took this photograph. As I grew, the cathedral grew. It was under construction. I knew all the makers. And what I learned at about age 7 was that three-dimensional space, as defined in this view by colored glass, sculpted limestone, much like you have here, the vault itself, the floor, which you can't see, the sculptures that are all around. I learned that abstract space is capable of transmitting and conversing, being conversant in something of the Spirit. Now, there's not a whole lot of students here, but I'm sure I'm going to get asked, so what do you mean by the Spirit? Well, we'll deal with that later, but I think many of you have a sense of that. And the Spirit, to me, at age 7, and to this day, and I think to many of the adults at that time when I was 7, was communicated most profoundly by the abstract stuff. I'm looking for my pointer here. Not the stories in the glass as much as what the glass, and it's a little light in here, but there's a wonderful color, glow, from the glass on that limestone. And that was what grabbed me when I was 7 and has ever since. So I was well in my 40s before I realized, oh, I'm doing the same stuff that many of the people I grew up with were doing. The carvers, the stained glass window makers, the mosaic people, the architect himself. And I've gotten to make many big things in my time that have some of the Spirit in them. This is the Shimmer Wall. You can go on websites and find lots of things. Also, somewhere around the birth of my first child, in my 40s, I joined, after several decades of not going to church, I actually started going to a church. It's funny how kids do that to you. And we stuck at this church, which is St. Mark's in Raleigh, an Episcopal church, because early on I joined improbably a Lenten study group. I've never been in a study group ever. And we were reading about the crucifixion that was coming, and it was also the time of the Bosnian War and wars, and there was lots of violence that I was reading about every day. And somehow out of the two came these crosses, which are each made out of an act of violence, really. This is shotgun, triple-aught shotgun, very powerful. Blast, several of them made this cross. These are 4 by 4 feet. Takes a while to change, it seems. Here's a close-up. This one was made by burning a wood panel of the same size. And this one, which is very hard to see, was made by hacking with a chainsaw, not something you want to try in your garage. And there are other ones that ensued. And so the cross became, like the cathedral, I could make something very abstract that communicated to me and to my fellow parishioners about, in that case, the impending Easter that was coming. Well then, by miraculous good fortune, I encounter this group, and we're missing Susan Jones, who wanted to make a cross in this space. And yes, I said, so why do you want to do that? You already have one right over there. And a lot of conversation ensued, and I'm going to talk about, at the cathedral, I think the profundity of that place is where the heart and mind meet the hand. The cathedral's built by hand, pretty much. There are cranes involved, but they're operated by hand. And this cross is very much the convergence of those three things. Some of them are almost sort of technical, like where to put it. And this may be hard to see. So these, I had to hasten to the group to explain the cross will not be bright green. This is so you can see, does it want to be back there, over the altar, where it is now, or in front? And they have each the answers to those three. There's no right answer, but they are different. I'm clicking. So here is in front, and it felt detached from the altar. The next alternative was way in the back, and this is, sort of for the elite, the preachers, etc., in the back, but not the congregation. And so that was ruled out. And then right over the altar seemed not enough with the people, and so we ended up where it is, and I think it was the right choice. Another issue is shape. So cross, which cross would that be? The so-called, I think this is called the Latin cross, is that right? Or the Greek cross, the equilateral, like crossroads, and they are very different. And we chose to ally ourselves with the more Western tradition, which you see here. Tilt, does it want to hang straight up and down, like it is? Or, should we go manual maybe? Or I don't know. So that's straight up and down, or leaning more. And it felt kind of threatening. Yes, you could see it a little better. You're not sort of angling your head so much, but it seemed to be kind of more aggressive than it wanted to be. Next. And so that was not technical, but perhaps easier decisions then. So what does it want to be made out of? And early on, and there were lots of preconceptions, including some I had, this is a magnificent space. It is incredibly well appointed and well designed and carefully designed. And does it want to be another accessory, in essence, that comes from what's here now? And there's a real divide in the highway that we said, no, it can't be. If it's going to have the power that it needed to have, it needed to be something completely different from what's here now. Not doing violence to what's here now, but different from. So we thought about metal in a very different way than shiny brass, more like the metal of these old buildings, rusty and craggy and connecting to the earth. Or wood. Again, not like this beautiful oak that's everywhere, but wood like an old barn kind of wood, or even burned wood. And we ruled that out because this is the South and that whole association, and it just seemed not right. Or glass, not nice shiny glass, but cast glass that's much rougher and rougher. Amazingly to me, and I think to all of us, we landed on a technique which I've been doing for a long time, about a decade and a half, called earth casting. Earth casting is the making of very large reinforced concrete things by first digging a mold in the ground, putting reinforcing steel in that mold, suspended above the mold, spraying concrete like a swimming pool is made into that mold, letting it cure for 28 days at least, and then hooking onto it, in this case with a 120-ton crane, and lifting next. Lifting this is a half of it. This weighs 40,000 pounds and is assembled with two so you can walk between it. Voila. And the ground is restored with bulldozers. We fill in the molds, and amazingly, wherever we've been, the grass grows better. As opposed to throwing molds away and clogging up our landfill, it's a very kind of ecological way of working. There is no waste whatsoever. So we decided to make a cross the same way, and here's how it was made. The core, which you see light through, you see here in this sort of blue styrofoam, and then the steel is hooked onto that. That was then next. We then drew the exact size onto our little dirt pile out back. This is downtown Raleigh. I have my own little small earth casting site here. We work 8 miles from there in West Raleigh, where we have 30 acres, and then north near Oxford we have about 100 acres. We can ride around with heavy equipment and make the big things, or they're made on site. So this is very close to my home. I live right there, and it was delightful to make it. So we draw the cross on the ground next, then dig the cross by hand in the ground, and then next, lower the structural cord with about 1/4 inch to spare down into the ground, and then by hand place concrete in the mold and around the core, and then fill it up and vibrate it so that the concrete goes into all the interstitial spaces and actually gets a good casting of the character of the earth. And finish it on the top. We then threw dirt on top of that. And next, 28 days later, we then yank it out of the ground, in this case with a forklift, because it only weighs 650 pounds. It's a lot lighter than I'm used to. And then we put it on a truck, just figuring out how to move it. Took some engineering. We bolted it to a thick piece of plywood in such a way that it would actually go in through the doors, starting right over there. And then with a crane we built on scaffolding, hanging a beam over with a chain fall, we were able to hoist it up and attach the two suspension wires, which will hold up at least 4 times the actual weight. So if there's a big hurricane that comes in here, we have some capacity in the structure, all of the structure, including the bolts that we hooked into the beams with. So all that was actually thought about. You'll be gratified to know. And finally, then actually there was press there. I show this because a lot of my colleagues were wondering so there we are, if you can see it, but next to it was 8 held in drug sweep. And that caused some confusion. And I think, is that the last slide? No, this is the last slide, which is a photograph of what you see. So that is the story of how this was thought about and how it was made. And there was the last piece, and then I'd love to hear your comments. There was I think in the second sort of theological discussion, I was pressing the point, well, is this an Easter? Is this a Good Friday cross? death, blood, destruction, depression? Or is this an Easter cross? Is this resurrection? Is this Sunday? And not too surprisingly, there was not a clear answer that just rung out from the august group that most of whom are here. And I somewhat cynically said, well, does this mean it's a Saturday morning cross? And in a way, it kind of is. The light in here is just fabulous, and I think the building committee courageously didn't put stained glass windows here, but rather let the spirit through the changing light in these great trees. I mean, they, I think, very courageously said, nope, we don't need to mess that up. We need to let it be. But using that light as a slot through this very rough and craggy cross seemed to get at both sides of the Easter story. And we all sort of knew it when this form emerged. So I'm thrilled that it's here, relieved that it's hanging, and I'm very grateful to have gone back to my childhood and wrestle with all this again. And it's been a delight to know all of you, the Owens and the dean and the assistant dean, and which Susan was here, and your fabulous chaplain, Sally, who I've known actually for a long time. It's been delightful to be here. So thank you for the last year, and thank you for being here. I know some of you guys have to skedaddle, and I've been pre-warned not to take offense, so I won't. So we have I have plenty of time for questions, if there are any comments, curiosities, whatever. Yes?
Did you have any idea how much it was going to weigh when you were making it?
I knew fairly precisely how much it was going to weigh because I had to engineer it for that weight. When you work in the public,
When did the roughing up parts take place?
the roughing up part came in the carving of the cross shape in the earth. And no matter how careful you try to be, you're still carving in the earth. And so the earth pushes back. And so what you see here is the sort of shaking hands between human intention and the grain of the earth. What nature has put there, God has put there for centuries, many, many centuries. This color, those rocks, the stratification is all eons old. And so there's a wonderful balance of what we as humans can invent, the engineering, the figuring out the weight ahead of time, blah, 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 and the spontaneous pushback of that particular little plot of earth when I carved it. So that's where the roughness came. Yes?
The color. Was there color to the concrete, or is that the clay it was in? If that's the clay it was in, is that the earth still attached, or is it just stained?
Did everybody hear that? Where did the color come from? And you're very astute in thinking, well, there's the dirt itself that when you pour liquid concrete into an earth mold, it grabs on to dirt and rocks and all that color and texture. I also tint the concrete to be the color with iron oxide, which is the same stuff that colors our wonderful clay here in North Carolina in the first place. So what you're looking at now, you can't tell where the earth, real earth's ends and the tinted with iron oxide concrete begins. So that border between humans and nature is very thin there. Yes?
Say something about the center of the cross. Very, very, very different vertically and horizontally. The negative space, as it were.
Well, the fact that it actually is made out of 4 pieces, is that what you're...
I love the fact that it's shiny. It's
Oh.
It's clean, it's smooth. It actually reflects at different times of the day.
Yeah, if you walk around, you'll get the inside. I mean, we think of concrete as like a sidewalk, rough, cheap, and imprecise. In fact, concrete is as telegraphic as bronze is when you pour bronze into a mold. So the mold or the core on the inside, which we then removed, remember the blue stuff? That was like glass, made out of a plastic material that's as shiny as glass. So the concrete, remember the vibration? When you vibrate it, it goes up against that surface and is itself like glass. So if you move around, you'll get little reflections of this wonderful light that's trying to be about that mysterious resurrection part of the story. That zip of light which bangs around between this glass-like surface. And it's really amazing that concrete can be that smooth, as opposed to its outside, which is very, very rough. Yeah?
I was just curious as how you got the middle part out, the blue plastic. How did it?
So we lowered the blue, which is holding the steel, and it was designed so that we could drill through it and weaken it, and then it would collapse on itself, and we could pull it out and hope that the glass surface all worked. Yeah.
I'm a first-year divinity student here, and I just wanted to...
Thank you for coming.
Oh, I'm so excited. When we got the email saying that the chapel would be closed for a few days because of a cross installation, I was just so excited. First semester, when I would come in here to worship, I usually would... That little cross just seemed too little to me, so I'd usually focus on the window panes, the
Yep.
natural crosses in the window panes.
Yep.
And if not that, then I would focus on where the trees cross,
Uh-huh.
and I would look at crosses there.
Uh-huh.
And so when I found out there would be an actual cross, I was just thrilled. And when I first saw the scaffolding, I ran straight here to look in. And when I saw the cross, I thought it was just about perfect.
Oh, thank you.
I really enjoyed it. And I think probably because of where I am in my studies, which is a lot of Old Testament, it was what struck me is the Creator God that is in the cross from the earth. You know, the God of Genesis that is in the earth, combined with Christ on the cross. And of course, the Spirit fills the room anyway. So to me, it was just very emblematic of the whole Trinity in one sculpture, one cross. So I very much
Thank you.
appreciate it.
That's right. I hope this hasn't distracted the other crosses that are still there. I'm enjoying the conversation. So, a couple more? Yeah? Yes?
I was immediately struck with being able to see through the cross. And then I thought of the 23rd Psalm, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. We see the shadows or the reflections through the cross to eternity, and it's the hope of eternal healing as well. So it's wonderful. Thank you for the conception.
Well, this is why I like working here. You guys are really great at... Wow. Yeah.
Thomas, you've often talked about the interaction of the artist with the earth and the unknowns that you encounter when you involve yourself with your materials and with some processes that you don't always know how they're going to come out. Can you just speak to that sort of insecurity, joy, combination thing that the artist lives in?
Yeah, some artists, many artists, and many human beings want to control, let's talk about art, want to control their medium and want to, and have an idea, and it's about actualizing that idea. And you get as close to that idea as you can. I just don't work that way. It seems that life, my experience with life is that it's more like a scientist. You set up an experiment and you run that experiment, and then you get what you get. Like having children. You don't always get the child you think you should or deserve, or you get the kid you get. And it's a miraculous adventure from there. So I work that way intentionally, where the life of that surface, I don't know how to make happen. I can dig in the ground and set up a situation where I think that when the concrete comes out of the ground, it will have the spirit of that I want. But I don't predict and control all the little bumps. In the big pieces, you can see all these human marks, backhoes and shovels and feet and hands and screw-ups, and it all is there, as is all the geology. All of it comes out in the piece, and that's where its life comes from, in my view. One more?
This is not about the cross, but about your shimmer wall. How in the world did you ever conceive of that?
Last question, how did the shimmer wall is a 9,000 square foot louver that lets air into the HVAC and backup generators of the Raleigh Convention Center. And it had to be that big. And I saw what we were about to spend our taxpayers' money on, and a lot of it on these fixed louvers that looked boring. And 40,000 cars would look at that every day, and I thought, surely we can do better than that. And so I had a bunch of little fishing lures, and I made a little model with these fishing lures, and I said, see, we could do this. And the engineer said, oh, but they'll fly off when the hurricane comes. And I said, well, we can solve that problem, and we did. And it survived a hurricane, or almost hurricane.
It's a great wall.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. Oh, one more, okay, one more.
That photograph that you have obviously was taken from a higher perspective that none of us would be able to achieve. Is that photograph available?
I got that from the Divinity School, so you'll have to ask them, and I'm not sure how they must have had a big ladder. Yeah. And there was a big ladder? So you could bring a big ladder in here and maybe take your own.
Is that photograph able to be shared? Probably.
I suspect so.
And of course, the background is natural too, which just happens for a month or so every year. So it's an interesting combination of
Yeah,
things.
yeah. Well, thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.